Tonight, you're going to order dinner without thinking twice about where it came from. You'll open an app. You'll pick something. It will arrive at your door in 30 minutes. But the real answer to how humans eat is far stranger than a menu. For almost the entire span of human existence, there was no menu at all. There was no fridge. There was no farm. There was only the land and whatever it decided to give you that day. You are the descendant of people who never knew what they'd eat tomorrow. Not roughly. Not approximately. They genuinely did not know. And that uncertainty shaped everything about the body you're sitting in right now. Your cravings, your fat storage, your relationship with sugar. All of it was built by hundreds of thousands of years of not knowing where the next meal was coming from. So what did they actually eat? Not the version from a textbook illustration, with a caveman knowing a giant drumstick. The real version. The version anthropologists have spent decades piecing together from bones, teeth, ash pits, and fossilized feces. It's messier, it's more varied, and it's a lot more revealing about who you are today. Let's start with the biggest myth. The word caveman conjures an image of a hulking figure eating meat around a fire, every single night like an endless barbecue. That image is mostly wrong. For most early humans, meat was not the daily staple. It was the jackpot. Plants were the daily staple. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham, who has spent his career studying the evolution of human diet at Harvard, has argued that the real turning point for our species wasn't the addition of meat. It was the addition of fire. Cooking food, he suggests, unlocked calories that raw food simply couldn't provide. A cooked root delivers far more usable energy than a raw one. Cooked meat is easier to chew and digest than raw meat. Wrangham's research suggests that without cooking, the human brain, which burns an enormous amount of energy relative to its size, might never have been able to grow as large as it did. Think about that for a second. The thing that makes you capable of reading this sentence, capable of language, memory, planning, imagination, may trace part of its origin back to a campfire and a piece of scorched tuber. Your intelligence didn't start with an idea. It started with digestion. Before this idea took hold, most explanations for human brain growth focused on meat itself. The protein, the fat, the raw calories of hunted animals. And meat certainly mattered, but Wrangham's cooking hypothesis reframed the question entirely. It wasn't just what our ancestors ate. It was how they transformed it before eating it. Fire was, in a sense, an external stomach. It did part of the work of digestion outside the body, breaking down tough fibers and proteins before a single bite was taken. That meant less energy spent chewing and digesting, and more energy available for everything else, including, over enormous stretches of time, for growing a bigger, hungrier brain. But before fire changed everything, and even long after, the actual composition of the ancient diet was built on foraging. Roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, leafy greens, berries, insects, yes, insects which are still eaten by billions of people today and are packed with protein. Shellfish along coastlines, eggs, when they could be found. Honey, when a hive could be located and the stings endured. And meat, hunted or scavenged, whenever the opportunity actually appeared. The ratio between plant and animal food wasn't fixed. It shifted dramatically depending on where people lived. Groups near the equator in dense forests ate mostly plants because plants were abundant year-round. Groups near the poles, like ancestral populations in the Arctic, ate almost entirely animal fat and meat because for much of the year, plants simply didn't exist there. There was no single Paleo diet. There were thousands of different diets, each one shaped entirely by geography. This is where the second myth falls apart. The modern idea of eating like a caveman usually imagines one universal diet, heavy in meat, light in carbohydrates. But researcher Katharine Milton, who studied primate and human nutrition extensively, has pointed out that ancestral human diets were remarkable mainly for their diversity, not for any single dominant macronutrient. Early humans in different regions ate wildly different things. What united them wasn't the specific food. It was the constant, low-grade uncertainty about whether there would be enough of it. Milton's work also drew a striking comparison between humans and other primates. Most primates, she observed, are constrained to a fairly narrow range of foods, dictated by their gut anatomy and the specific ecosystems they evolved in. Humans are the outlier. Human digestive systems, combined with tool use, cooking, and social cooperation, allowed our species to eat an extraordinarily wide range of foods across an extraordinarily wide range of environments, from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra to high-altitude deserts. That flexibility, more than any single food, may be one of the most important traits your ancestors carried with them. That uncertainty is the real inheritance you're carrying around today, not a specific diet, a psychology. Here's what that means in practice. Your body evolved in a world of feast and famine, not steady abundance. When ancient humans found a tree full of ripe fruit, or a beehive dripping with honey, or a herd freshly killed, the smart evolutionary move wasn't moderation. It was excess. Eat as much as possible right now, because there was no guarantee of a tomorrow with food in it. Bodies that were efficient at storing extra calories as fat survived leaner stretches better than bodies that weren't. That trait got passed down. Generation after generation, the humans who survived were the ones whose bodies said yes to abundance and held on to it. Now flip to today. You live most likely in a world where abundance isn't rare. It's constant. Sugar, fat, and salt are available every single hour of every single day. But the ancient wiring inside your brain hasn't caught up. It still treats a donut the way your ancestors' brains treated a beehive, as an unpredictable jackpot worth gorging on immediately. Except the donut isn't unpredictable anymore. It's always there. And the part of you built for scarcity doesn't know how to say no to something that never runs out. This is why nutrition researchers increasingly frame modern obesity not as a failure of willpower, but as a mismatch. Your body is running ancient software in a completely different environment than the one it was written for. Evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman, who has spent years studying the physiology of the human body in the context of its evolutionary past, describes many modern health problems as mismatched diseases. The body isn't broken. The world changed faster than the body could. Lieberman's research pushes this idea even further. He points out that many of the physical activities your ancestors performed almost every day, walking long distances, carrying loads, digging, climbing, are now optional in modern life. You can go from bed to car to desk to couch without your body ever being asked to do the work it evolved to expect. Combine a body built for scarcity and constant movement with a modern world of abundance and stillness, and you get exactly the kinds of chronic conditions: obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease that were exceedingly rare among foraging populations and are now widespread in industrialized nations. So what did an actual day of eating look like deep in prehistory? For most of human history, before agriculture, people were what anthropologists call hunter-gatherers or foragers. And contrary to the grim image many people carry of desperate, starving cave dwellers, research on modern-day foraging societies, groups who still live largely off the land, suggests something surprising. Foraging for food often took less time than you'd expect. Some studies estimate as little as 3 to 5 hours a day spent acquiring food, with the rest of the day left for rest, socializing, tool making, and storytelling. Anthropologists studying groups like the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last populations on Earth still living substantially as foragers, have documented this pattern directly. Days are not consumed entirely by the hunt for food. There's time for rest in the heat of the afternoon, time for children to play, time for elaborate storytelling around a fire in the evening, stories that often encode practical survival knowledge inside entertaining narratives, a kind of oral encyclopedia passed down generation after generation. That doesn't mean it was easy. It means it was different. Foraging required deep, intimate knowledge of the local environment. Which plants were edible, which were poisonous, which ripened in which season, where water pooled after rain, where animals passed through at dawn. This knowledge wasn't written down anywhere. It lived in memory, passed from elder to child, refined over countless generations of trial, and sometimes fatally error. Children in foraging societies would have learned to identify dozens, sometimes hundreds, of edible plant species by the time they reached adulthood. Compare that to how many wild edible plants the average person today could name. Probably none. That gap represents an enormous amount of lost knowledge. Knowledge your ancestors carried as casually as you carry the layout of a grocery store. Much of this knowledge, historically, was organized along gendered lines, and this division of labor turns out to matter more than it first appears. In many documented foraging societies, women and children were responsible for the bulk of plant gathering, digging up tubers, collecting nuts and seeds, harvesting fruit, work that was steady, predictable, and provided the majority of daily calories. Men were more often responsible for hunting, work that was far less predictable. A hunt could fail entirely again and again for days or weeks at a time. This matters because it reshapes the whole man the hunter narrative that dominated popular imagination for much of the 20th century. If daily survival depended primarily on steady, reliable gathering, and only occasionally on the unpredictable success of a hunt, then plant knowledge, not hunting prowess, was arguably the true backbone of ancient survival. Anthropologists studying groups like the Jugoensi of the Kalahari Desert found that gathered plant foods often provided the majority of caloric intake, with meat serving as a valued but irregular supplement, prized as much for its social and nutritional richness as for its raw caloric contribution. This also reframes what providing for the family actually meant across most of human history. It wasn't primarily about a triumphant kill. It was, day after day, about knowing exactly where to dig, when to return to a ripening patch of berries, which roots were safe after a certain rainfall. That kind of knowledge doesn't make for a dramatic cave painting. But it's what actually kept people alive, meal after meal, season after season, for hundreds of thousands of years. And speaking of variety, here's something that might surprise you. Ancient diets were, in many ways, far more varied than the modern diet most people eat today. A typical hunter-gatherer group might consume dozens of different plant species across a single season. Modern diets, especially in industrialized nations, often revolve around a small handful of staple crops: wheat, corn, rice, soy. That narrowing didn't happen because ancient variety was inefficient. It happened because agriculture rewarded consistency and scale over diversity. Farming a single crop across a huge field is efficient. Foraging dozens of different plants across a huge territory is not, at least not in terms of modern economic efficiency. But it may have been better, in some ways, for the body. There's another piece of this puzzle that rarely makes it into the popular picture of ancient eating: the seasonal rhythm of it all. Your ancestors weren't eating the same handful of foods every day, all year round. Their diet shifted dramatically with the seasons, in a way almost no modern diet does. Early spring might mean tender shoots and greens, some of the first fresh food after a lean winter. Summer might bring a flood of fruit and berries, gorged on intensely while they lasted. Autumn often meant nuts, rich in fat and calories, gathered and sometimes stored for the coming cold. Winter, in many climates, meant survival on stored fat, dried meat, and whatever roots could still be dug from frozen ground. This seasonal rhythm wasn't an inconvenience your ancestors tolerated. It was, in a sense, the calendar their entire lives were built around. Festivals, migrations, gatherings between different bands of people, all of it often synced to these food cycles. A particular valley might draw multiple family groups together every year at exactly the moment a specific nut tree ripened, creating not just a meal, but a social event, a chance to trade news, arrange marriages, share stories that repeated with the reliability of the season itself. Even the practice of food storage, something we now take completely for granted with pantries and freezers, was a genuine technological achievement for early humans. Drying meat in the sun, smoking it over fire, burying nuts in cool, dry ground, rendering animal fat down into a stable, long-lasting substance. These were not simple tricks. They were the accumulated, hard-won knowledge of countless generations, refined and passed down precisely, because getting them wrong could mean a family didn't survive the winter. This brings us to one of the strangest twists in the whole story. When agriculture finally did emerge, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, it's often taught as an unambiguous leap forward for humanity. Farming meant stability. Farming meant surplus. Farming meant civilization. But the skeletal record tells a more complicated story. Studies of human remains from the transition into agriculture, in multiple regions around the world, show something unexpected. Early farmers were often shorter and showed more signs of nutritional stress than the foragers who came before them. Bioarchaeologists have found evidence in these skeletons, things like enamel defects in teeth, indicating periods of malnutrition or illness during childhood, appearing more frequently after the shift to farming than before it. Agriculture provided more calories overall. It just provided fewer kinds of them. Researchers studying skeletal remains across the Neolithic transition, in regions ranging from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Americas, have repeatedly found the same pattern. Average height dropped. Signs of infectious disease increased, likely tied to living in denser, more permanent settlements alongside domesticated animals for the first time. Dental problems increased sharply as diets shifted towards starchy, sticky grains that fed the bacteria responsible for tooth decay. In many ways, the agricultural revolution, often framed as the moment humanity finally solved the problem of hunger, actually appears in the bones as a moment of decline in individual health, even as total population size began to explode. A diet built almost entirely around a single grain, whether wheat, rice, or maize, delivers plenty of energy but far fewer of the vitamins, minerals, and micronutrients that a varied foraging diet naturally supplied. In other words, agriculture solved the problem of not having enough food, but it may have created a new problem, not having enough different kinds of food. Your ancient ancestors, foraging across dozens of plant species, may have been eating a diet closer to what modern nutritionists now recommend than the diet many of their farming descendants adopted thousands of years later. There's something almost poetic in that. The primitive diet may have been nutritionally more sophisticated than the advanced one that replaced it. It's worth pausing here to ask why humans made the switch to agriculture at all, if it came with these costs. The honest answer is that no single forager sat down and chose farming over foraging because it seemed healthier. Agriculture likely emerged gradually, often in response to environmental pressures, changing climates, growing populations, and shrinking wild food sources that made a reliable, storable food supply more valuable than a varied but unpredictable one. Farming didn't win because it was better for any individual body. It won because it could support far more bodies in a smaller area, even if each of those bodies, on average, was a little less healthy than the foragers who came before them. Evolution and history don't optimize for individual well-being. They optimize for what spreads, what survives, what multiplies. Agriculture multiplied. Now here's the twist that connects all of this back to you, sitting wherever you're sitting right now. Every craving you've ever felt for something salty, something sweet, something rich in fat isn't a personal weakness. It's an echo. It's your body running an ancient survival program in a world that no longer matches the one that program was written for. When you stand in front of an open fridge at midnight, unsure what you want but certain you want something, you are, in a very real sense, replaying a scene that has been happening inside human brains for hundreds of thousands of years. The scene has just moved indoors. Your ancestors didn't have refined sugar. They had ripe fruit available for a few precious weeks a year, and their brains rewarded them intensely for eating it while they could. That reward system never went away. It's still active in you, right now, exactly as intense as it was in a forager standing beneath a fig tree 40,000 years ago. The only thing that changed is that the fig tree became a vending machine, and the vending machine never runs out of season. The same logic applies to salt and fat. In a world without refrigeration or supply chains, sodium was often scarce, and fat was one of the most calorie-dense, survival-critical substances available. A brain wired to crave both of those things intensely wasn't being greedy. It was being efficient, prioritizing exactly the nutrients that were hardest to find and most valuable to store. Strip away the scarcity, and that same efficient wiring becomes a liability rather than an asset. The craving hasn't changed. Only the environment around it has. Even the way modern food is engineered plays directly into this ancient wiring. Food scientists have long understood something your ancestors never needed a name for. The brain responds most intensely to combinations of flavors that almost never occur together in nature. Fat paired with sugar. Salt paired with fat. These pairings barely exist in the wild. A ripe fruit is sweet but rarely fatty. A piece of meat is rich in fat but rarely sweet. Modern processed food routinely combines these in ways nature almost never did, and the ancient reward centers of your brain, having no evolutionary precedent for resisting such a combination, respond exactly the way they were built to respond to anything calorie-dense and rare. Except now it isn't rare. It's on every shelf, in every aisle, at every hour. None of this means your ancestors ate correctly, and you're eating correctly. It means the two of you are, in a strange and very real sense, the same brain, dropped into two completely different worlds. One where calories were the limiting factor, and the body's job was to chase them. Another where calories are nearly limitless, and the body still hasn't been told to stop chasing. Understanding this doesn't mean abandoning modern food entirely, and it doesn't mean chasing some mythical, perfect ancestral diet either. Because as you now know, there wasn't one single ancestral diet to chase. There were thousands, shaped by thousands of different environments. What connected them wasn't the specific ingredients. It was variety. It was uncertainty. It was a body built to adapt. What you actually inherited isn't a recipe. It's a relationship. A relationship between your body and unpredictability, forged over an almost unimaginable stretch of time, and still running quietly underneath every single choice you make about food today. So tonight, when you open that app and order dinner, without thinking twice about where it came from, remember what you're really doing. You're not just eating. You're closing a loop that started with a forager, scanning a horizon, wondering, hoping whether today would be a day with enough.